Hello, this is Arjun Krasnikov, and this is another activity and listen video for Delzhi in 44 letters. This is the video I'm making halfway through going over the Delzhi alphabet. We've covered 22 of the 44 letters, and now that we have a lot more sounds and vocabulary used to us, we can do another exercise of using the letters to create words. And it doesn't get any easier. It gets a little bit harder. It gets easier for me to have words to use, but they do get harder. And as I've said many times and have reiterated, probably so much that people don't care to hear it anymore, learning new writing is very difficult. It's very challenging. This exercise is more to show you the process, and there's certainly no expectation from me for anybody to be able to just do this little quiz out of memory. And after we do a couple of the word making drills, I'm just going to work on some letter forms and talk a little bit about design in general and what goes into writing design and exactly how the Delzhi alphabet is a challenge artistically and design-wise as much as it is a challenge about teaching culture. It's kind of a multifaceted thing that exists now, and so I'm going to go a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of writing and talk about the alphabet system and use some examples of other types of writing systems too. So, as you can see, we're in landscape mode, and I have my wider paper, and I'm going to use my dot markers because I like how wide they are for making word forms. I just think they work better for the Delzhi alphabet. They're more modern looking. They're like a larger version of a ballpoint pen, another thing that I've said before. So I'm going to sit down, and I have a list of words here that I've made that just use the letters and sounds that I've covered so far in the past 22 videos. We do have a lot more of the vocabulary open to us. Not a whole bunch more, but definitely enough that there's a bigger selection of words to practice with. So I'm going to use a purple dot marker because it's the most visible on this paper, and I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to say a word, explain the word, and then you're going to think about how you might make these using just the letters from the Delzhi alphabet that we've covered. Excuse me. All right, the first word we are going to do is pretty easy. It's very short. It's just the word for glacier, she. Now, if you go back and you remember this word from one of the more recent videos where I talk about the voiceless L and how it's breathy like that, we know that we make that with this shape here, and that vowel sound E is the letter E's, and so we make that here. And I'm just doing full capital letters to make it as easy as possible. And I'll go ahead and write the Latin equivalent. So there's L with a slash and an I. This is li for glacier. Okay, here's another one that is fairly easy. This word is dehi. And dehi means like, in olden times, it means like a food storage or a cache or something like that, something that would be built in the underground of a lodge. But in modern times, this can also mean like a pantry. Your pantry is your dehi. Okay, let's go ahead and make that. So we know that it starts with that really basic D sound, so that's the letter das. That sound, which is more closer to a schwa for people who know more about English sounds. It is close to the letter L, which is that sound in Denina. So the Delzhi letter for that. is L, the root. The next is that H sound. It's the letter het. That kind of loopy looking dog sled. And then again, E. So we do E's, Delhi. And here's the Latin equivalent. I'll do in little letters, Delhi. Very simple. Okay, let's do one that's a little bit more nuanced. This is short, but it's nuanced. This is a word for an insect or a bug, and it can be any. It's like talking about them in general. Like, oh, there's bugs over there, and that is gee. Like, oh my gosh, this place needs to be cleaned. It's full of gee. Now this one is a little bit tricky because if you are able to tell, I have a little bit more of a breathy sound on the end of that E vowel. And that lets you know that this word actually necessitates a letter after the vowel. And in this case, it's the letter het. So let's write gi. Now the first one is that real simple, real basic G sound, which is the letter gu. That helix looking shape. And then the letter E again, is, which is a very common vowel in Dena'ina. That's why this shape will show up everywhere when writing Dena'ina words. And then for that breathy sound, when people were transcribing Dena'ina into Latin letters, they decided to add on the letter H to mark that breathy sound, because it doesn't really stand on its own, but it also doesn't fully incorporate into a vowel. It doesn't modify the vowel E's in any way. So they use an H, or in this case, het. So this is gi, gun, is, het. And I'll write it here in the Latin equivalent, T-I-H, gi. Okay, let's do one that we've done before. I made a whole video kind of themed around this, and this is the outer inlet word for rainbow. This is jabila. 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 And this one, it's long, but it's actually very simple. So you should be able to go back if you can. I know it's not all that easy to go back to these different full videos without some kind of a synopsis or guide, but maybe you've made notes, who knows. So we know that the letter job was designed based on this word. It's these two arcs here for the J sound, and then the ang for the A, then ben for the B sound, which is that curve almost like a musical note, and then our favorite E's again, E's, and then luch, because this is the fully voiced L. It's not this unvoiced one like we had in Delhi. So it's the stick and snare shape. And then, one more time. Excuse me, I got some sick in my throat. I just had coffee. Jabila. And I'll write the Latin equivalent here. Okay, now let's do one that is a little similar, but this one is going to be a little bit more tricky because there's a few more letters, and also there might be a sound that is a little bit difficult. Now this is the word for a wild geranium, and wild geraniums are those bluish violet wildflowers that grow in the summer. Not very tall, but they do have some big robust plants with lots of leaves, but they're very purpley and round, and they're very common everywhere in this area where I am. And the Dena'ina word for those is jahjadi. 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 And if we were to go back and listen to those sounds, parse them out again. We're going to start similar to what we did with jabila, which is job, for ja. And then we had that really breathy, throaty L in the first syllable, jal, jal. So we used letter she again. And then the second syllable starts kind of the same way as the first. Another job, another ang. So we're at jal, ja. And then the last syllable is D. So we know that is das and is. Ja, jadi. And I don't have much room over here, so I'll write a little arrow to it. This is the Latin equivalent. J-A-L with a little kind of a backslash through it. That's how Latin writes the unvoiced L. Then jadi. Okay, I think that's all the words I wanted to go through for this, and I think what I would like to do now is to talk a little bit about transcription. And I have used words from other languages before in doing these videos and examples, but I think I found a very good way to explain the challenge of using a system created to reflect one language's sounds and applying it to another, and how that's never a one-for-one scenario. People kind of think writing can be easily replicated, but you have to think about not just sounds, but you have to think about meaning and intention, and that's why translation of written literature is a very delicate process. And whenever there are books published in other languages, usually what happens is, if you've noticed a book that you have read that's been translated by somebody else, they're mentioned along with the author because they almost have an authorship level of involvement in that book as much as the original writer does, because they are the one who, whether or not they've actually worked with the author themselves, they're the one that is reading that original, and they're trying to convey the same feeling and function, both of those things, in their translation. And so that's why you'll see books that say translated by so-and-so. And I read a lot of different spiritualism books, and so I have books like the Book of Tao and things like that, and what I'm reading are modern English translations of these original texts written in classical Chinese. They are very far from the original authors knowing what their original intention and meaning is. And that's another reason why liturgy and studying religions is a little bit complicated, and why it could be so controversial in every religion worldwide, studying things like scriptures, because translation and time changing what meaning is, it just seems to blur so much of what we know and read and what we symbolize. And that's one of the biggest reasons why scripture-based faiths have so many fractured denominations. And this is not just Christianity. This is any religion that is heavily connected to a body of written work. It could be any religion at all. It can be Judaism, Islam, classics from Hinduism, definitely Taoism, because there are many what are considered like the classical libraries of Taoist thought. Any of these major belief systems, and there are many interpretations of what these words mean. And it only gets more complicated as time goes on and modern life changes, because, as I mentioned in the last regular video, we're really talking about when as much as we are talking about where and what. But anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. So to put all that into simple terms of what I'm doing here with this alphabet is I'm going to explain why translation or transcription, because this is script, it's writing, can be difficult. So let's use two really simple English words, and I'm going to use a different color. I'll just go to I'll use this orange. Let me test it, see if it's visible. Oh yeah, that's pretty visible. Okay, so the first English word that I want to show as an example is the word, oh God, what did I write here? Oh, let's write the word den. Well, no, I can't do that because we didn't cover that letter yet. Oh man, see, I wrote this list in advance, and I'm already finding where I'm not able to use a word that I wanted to use. Okay, well I'm gonna skip to the second one because this is kind of the meat of what I'm trying to say. So let's take a simple word. Going back to geese, let's think about insects. Let's think about bees. Here's a little bee here. I'm just gonna draw one for fun. He's flying around. He's very round. There's my little bee. Now, let's say we want to write the English word bee using Delzhi letters. Well, because we want to convey the sound of the language primarily, we already know the definition. We have a common definition. And there are denied words for bees and different kinds of bees, but for the sake of ease, let's say I'm somebody who is making an all English text that just happens to use Delzhi letters. Now, people might think that, okay, well, this is how you spell it in English. B-E-E. B. And they might look at a chart of Delzhi letters and just do letter for letter, change these, and do Ben, L, L. But when we read this using Denina sounds, this does not say B. This says be. Be. And then that brings us to thinking, okay, well, in English, when we have these two E sounds put together, these two letters together make one phoneme, one sound. And that sound is equivalent to E's in Denina. E, because that's the same sound. So when we write the English word B in Delzhi letters, it is just Ben and E's. So it's actually only two letters in this system, three in this, but both the same sound, and they take the same amount of time to say. And so that's a very small example of the wider array of, especially the sound issue of transcription and translation. And think about big, massive words that have overlapping sounds or diphthongs and in different languages, and how there's rules about changing sounds and how difficult that is. And so it really does take almost an author's level of writing and expression to make an effective translation. Okay, eventually I got there. These are a little bit more free form, so I'm not concerned about sticking to any time or outline. And I think what I want to do next is talk a little bit about alphabets and why they are different from other writing systems, because there are different kinds. Alphabet is just one. And I have another word that I can use as an example for this. And this is, well, it's a set of words. Now, let's see, what color am I going to use? I'll use this is my soft green, my absolute favorite color. Now, As I said, alphabets are just one type of writing system for people that aren't awfully familiar. There are many other types, but they're generally organized into different categories, kind of like family trees. And instead of talking about a whole bunch of different ones and just boggling about it, I'm going to use an example of why alphabets are, of how they're different from a different writing system. And so the writing system I would like to talk about is an abjad. Now, I cannot write any abjads. I don't speak languages with abjads. I don't study languages that use abjads, so I only know about them through their function and studying them in the role of linguistics and the history of writing. So maybe I'm not the best person to talk about them, but I do know what they are. So an abjad is a system that looks and feels similar to an alphabet, where in alphabets we have letters for consonants and vowels, which we learn at a very young age. And over here I'll write alphabets. Same thing, consonants and vowels. But the general rule of abjads, and what makes an abjad is that they, more or less, do not use vowels, with certain exceptions here and there. And so it's just a string of consonants. And to write an example, I'll write hello, my name is, using just consonants in capital letters. So HLLM. Y is a vowel in this case, so I'm not going to write it. NM, no A or E, and then S. Now, this is probably hard to read, HLLM, NMS, but we can guess that this sentence is actually trying to say, hello, my name is, because this pattern of consonants might look familiar. And that's sort of how abjads works. Abjads are these sequences of consonants that tell people full words and phrases, including the vowels. But the vowels don't have a role in their grammar or their word forming. They are either regionalized or they're interchangeable for the most part. And there's enough context in an abjad where messing up a vowel or two here and there isn't going to change the intent and the definition of what's being written, and the language it represents. And that's a little bit difficult to explain, but here's a terrific example. Okay, let's pretend, kind of like I just wrote here, that we're using these Latin letters as an abjad, that we're not using vowels. Okay, well, let's say we want to write, we just had Halloween. Let's say you want to write that you had a bat up. Well, you spell bat without the A, it's BT. Now, let's say you're taking the bat down and then you bet whoever it is you live with, $5 that you would have 5 or more trick-or-treaters visiting this year. And so you're going to write that you had a bet. Well, take out the E. You got BT. And you can see where I'm going with this right off the bat. Again, bat. And then let's say you're having a piece of leftover Halloween candy. I don't know a good sentence to use the word, but like, oh, just give me a bit of that. We'll take out the S sound. Take out the I. Again, BT. Oh, I'm going to write about it online. It's like, oh, I wrote about this Halloween candy online, but all I saw was a bunch of bots. Look at what this bot wrote. So take out the O. And then, of course, if you want to argue online about somebody about the bad Halloween candy you had, you use the word but. So take out U. Here's but, BT. So as you can see, bat, bit, bit, bought, and but would all be the exact same if English used an abjad. And so you can see where this system does not make sense for contemporary English whatsoever. We need to see the vowels because the vowels change whole definitions of words. They have a strong morphological value, and morphology is how words are created. And so when vowels have embedded morphological value and they play a role in grammar, like when we conjugate vowels like bit, bite, buy and bought, words like that, they have a bearing on spelling. And so we need to show those vowels somehow, and that's why English, contemporary English, is very good for things like a modern alphabet. Now, as I said, I'm not familiar with languages that use abjads, but the most commonly referenced languages are the Semitic languages. And for people who don't know, the Semitic languages are original Middle Eastern languages like Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and there's a few other ones that are similar or like considered sub-languages of those that use an abjad system where you'll see Arabic or Hebrew, which are both read right to left, incidentally, and you'll see that those are all actually just consonants, and that's why some of the writing seems a little bit short. Now, Arabic, I do know, has a few exceptions here and there. They have certain marks and features that kind of give context of what vowels should be used, kind of based on the intention and definition. But I don't know very much about that, but I do know that that's abjad. So that is why alphabet is very useful for English. And it's also why I chose, beyond the fact that people are more familiar with alphabets to people who encounter Denina, it also works better with Denina, in my opinion, because we do have words where vowels have that morphological value, where they do change the definitions of words. And I can think of a couple. If I think hard, I can think of a similar example to bat, etc. in Denina. Oh, we just learned the word dehi. Well, there is another word that means that is something rising, something like that. I'm not familiar with the root definition itself because I've only seen it in compound words. But there is a word that is called dahi, and dahi means like things that are rising up. Let me grab another color again. And I'll go to another piece of paper. So we just learned that dehi can mean a food storage or a pantry. And here it is. But if we want to say a thing that's rising up, something that is floating or coming up, something like that. I think that this is what this means. I could be wrong, but this is just the word that I remember off the top of my head. But this is dahi. So you have dehi and dahi. The only difference is the vowels. Two very different words. One is more of a tangible place. The other is more of an abstract concept of floating or rising. And so if we just used Delzhi as an abjad, we would just do das and het for both. And there's not enough information there to tell you that these are two different words. And so that's why I think that Delzhi is a written system that works very well for a language like Denina, because there are words that do have that morphological value in vowels. And the last thing I wanted to do, the very last thing, I think I said this was the last thing, but honestly, these are more freeform for me. I think I'm just going to take one of my pens and I'm going to do some lettering. And when it comes to design, and so what I like to do in my spare time, even when I'm just waiting somewhere, in a waiting room, and I have a pad of paper with me, which I usually do, I'm just doing this, like kind of like that copper sheet that I use for my thumbnail image. I just do lettering over and over and over again. And the reason I do this is not because I'm trying to practice the alphabet, so to speak, but I'm trying to get more in the habit of writing the alphabet in general. Because over time, practicing this creates a kind of style and fluidity. Kind of like a kid learning to write. When you see what they write in school, sometimes they're hard to read because their lettering is all over the place and spaced out weird and funny. And that's kind of how this started. And then I realized, oh, I need to think like I'm a kid, back in kindergarten, first grade, doing lettering practice. And so that's what I started to do years ago, and I just keep doing it. So I have probably thousands of these sheets everywhere. Most of them are very small, with small ballpoint pens. So this is a little bit bigger and chunkier. And that is to just get myself to a point where I can use this in a consistent manner. And consistency in writing is important for the communication value, because if you don't have clear consistency in your writing, it doesn't communicate as well. It's not effective. We've all seen people who write with total chicken scratch. We've all seen poorly made signs. We've seen things that just don't seem to make sense. They look odd. They're funny. We share them as memes online. Bad signs a lot. I do a lot because I am the person that will point out somebody's bad grammar. I'll be that jerk. That's me. I don't mind. I don't mind being language bad cop. And the reason I don't mind being language bad cop is not so much that I want to brag how much I know, even though I do. I love doing that. But it's because there is a genuine desire for me to want to help somebody, for me to want to say, hey, I know what you're trying to say. But to people that don't understand your own personal style or quirks, whatever they are, they're not going to know what you're trying to say. So I've done things before, like I've edited articles before for people many times, and there are people that write in one big string sentence. They don't seem to stop anywhere. They don't use any punctuation. Everything is one big run-on sentence, and so when you read that, it just sounds like that. And so when I edit those types of things, I tell people it's not because I'm saying you're poorly spoken or you're poorly educated or anything like that. It's because I know through talking and interacting with you exactly what you are trying to put out there, and what this writing reflects doesn't reflect those thoughts. And so it's kind of like going back to translation. It's a meeting of the minds. It's a meeting of what are we trying to say? What are we trying to do? Let's do this in a way that's much more universal. And so that's why there are things like style guides and schools of grammar, and why a lot of languages in the world, ones that are very tied to an ethnic group or a culture, why they're very heavily regulated. Like, I know in France and Iceland, there are these government-sponsored authorities that regulate the French and Icelandic languages, because even though they're definitely not in danger of going extinct anytime soon, they're such a matter of pride and identity and being able to curate their own educational worldview and thought through them is very important. It's intrinsic to being a French person. It's intrinsic to being an Icelander. They are a part of you, and we don't really have that in English. Of course, we have we have the Oxford English Dictionary. We have Merriam-Webster in the United States, and and there are many other versions of English around the world that have their own school of thought and rules, but there are so many exceptions, and it's just so wide because English is a widely spoken language, so we don't really have that. But anyways, I'm going to keep going and say finding consistency is important. And also, visual consistency is a part of that. It's not just the words and the punctuation, how people arrange them. It's how it looks, how it's written. And in today's modern life, because we use almost everything exclusively digitally, things like font and digital displays are so important to the current story of writing as we know it. And that's also why I like to practice lettering and hand lettering, is because I'm trying to find what feels natural to read, what feels naturally spaced. And for example, there's two concepts that people have to take into account when they are typing something. I'll just stop this for a minute so I can explain this. And for people who know about graphic design, this is basic stuff 101. This is typeface and printing 101. But there's two words. There's kerning and tracking. Now, kerning, they both have to do with space. But kerning is the width between different letter marks in like a font system. And if you look at something printed up close, here I have this lots of print, this pack of mineral paper that I use, that our eyes are very particular in that what we perceive as even and consistent is actually very different when you get close up and take literal measurements. So in the word here, Yasutomo, the brand of this paper, which I enjoy, you'll see that some of the space letters are farther apart than others, even though when we look at that word, it looks pretty even to us. It looks like a regular print word. But if you were to zoom in, and I'm going to try to do this where it's visible on camera somehow. If you zoom in, the space between the T and the first O is slightly bigger than the space between the O and the M. And that is because of kerning. And the kerning spaces between different letters are a part of the information stored in a font file that a computer uses. So whenever you type, if you were to type just different letters randomly, you'll get different spaces between different pairs of letters because your computer is trying to figure out what looks the most optimal. So that's part of the programming of a font. And there are many letters and things like ligatures, and ligatures are like a single printing of two letters that are blended together because their optimal kerning, quote unquote, is so close that parts of those letters blur into each other. And so if you look at print, and I'm going to see if there's any on here. I'm not sure because these are all very basic sans serif fonts. I don't see any ligatures, but if you'll notice in books a lot, you'll see where it looks like certain letters kind of blend into each other, certain pairs. And that's because their optimal visual reading power is so close that they kind of have to be blended into each other for that space to make sense. And so if I were to write the word kerning itself with inconsistent kerning, let's say, see, this looks kind of crazy, doesn't it? I have a ligature here that's an N and a G that I just invented. You know, every font and style has different sets and sizes of different when ligatures are used or when they're not. That's inconsistent. And so when I practice lettering, that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just doing it over and over and over again until I find some consistent appearance, some natural feeling pattern where what I look back at me has a sensible feel to it. And so even though the system is partially intended to be very free-form and very experimental for people and expressive, there is a part of me that does understand the value of having consistency and some kind of rules regarding spacing and structure. And but again, I'm not concerned about the rules. I'm concerned about finding what feels visually consistent. And so that's why I practice these kinds of things just over and over and over again, hundreds and thousands of times. And the other word I want to talk about is tracking. And tracking is similar to kerning, but think of it as one level outside. Tracking is the spacing of words itself. So let's say I'm going to write the phrase tracking and kerning. See, it looks like one big long word. That's because my tracking is very small. And tracking does affect space between letters in certain typing modes, but I won't get into that. But it's more or less the spacing between words. And so, but you can also have something, here's word tracking and kerning. See, those are too far apart. You almost don't know that they're the same sentence. You just think that these are like words on a whiteboard of going over a list or something. So something that looks more optimal to us, which we get in the habit of as kids when we do all this written practice, tracking and kerning. See, that looks natural. That looks like it's a part of a sentence. We know what that phrase is. Even if we don't know the definition, we know it's a written phrase and it says something, and that maybe we need to find out what those words are. And that's why writing drills are very important for learning a new language. It gets people used to that visual communication, and being able to express all of those elements of language is incredibly important. And even if you don't have vision, even if you have hearing issues, there is always some form of writing or communication process that helps clarify language, because we are such a writing dependent world as a whole. Okay, that video went on forever. That was very long, but I am happy I did it, because I think that all of these things, what I've talked about, writing systems, design, spacing, practice, translation, they're all related to each other, and they're all why an exercise such as creating a writing system, which many people do for fun, it's called, I don't know the word for it, they're called conscriptors, I think. They're people who invent writing systems for fun. And there's also a thing called conlangers, people who invent whole languages for fun. They're like linguistic exercises. They're even though sometimes they're meant for like fictional characters, very often people who are really into linguistics, far beyond I am even, do that for fun as an exercise to try to test the limits of language and how we can define and conceptualize things. But that's something I definitely do not want to get into. It's because that is beyond complicated, and it's even hard for me. But all of those things are related into expression, and why I care very much about this particular project of mine in general, because it touches on all of those things of communication. And communication is really the base function of what arts and culture is. That is art and culture. It is just communication. It's the communication of definitions and concept, and trying to find words for that in a very literal way is a part of that exercise. And so that's why I think doing this kind of system is a very valuable thing to get into. And all right, that's going to finish it up for this kind of exercise, an extra video. Nice and chunky, something you can watch, hopefully, and not get too lost in the woods with. But again, and if anybody has any questions or suggestions, please contact me. I'm open to those. And I will see you for the next part of Delzhi in 44 letters, where we're going to tackle the last half of the Delzhi alphabet. Thank you very much.